This is what happens when my son tells me to leave this house. Listen to the whole story. Like and subscribe to this Mother Story channel for more stories, and comment where you are watching this from.
When my son told me to leave his house, I smiled instead of crying. Not because it didn't hurt. Oh, it did. It cut through me in a way I never thought possible. But I smiled because in that moment I realized something I had spent my whole life trying to ignore. Sometimes, even the people you give everything to can forget what you gave up for them. I remember standing by the front door, holding my small suitcase, the same one I used when I moved into that house after my husband passed away. My son, David, couldn't even look me in the eye. His wife stood beside him, her arms crossed, her face tight with anger. She said, "It's just not working anymore, Mama. We need our space." I nodded. I didn't want to argue. I had learned over the years that silence sometimes protects your dignity better than words ever could. As I stepped out onto the porch, I could hear the faint laughter of my grandson, Caleb, from the living room. He didn't know what was happening. He just knew his grandma was always supposed to be there, making him pancakes, fixing his school uniform, humming old church songs while folding laundry. But that day, everything changed. The cool air hit my face, and I remember whispering, "Lord, give me strength." Because when your own child, the one you raised, the one you stayed up all night for, the one you prayed over, tells you there's no place for you anymore, it feels like the ground gives way beneath your feet. Still, I walked away, slowly, quietly, not out of pride, but because I knew deep down that if I stayed another minute, I would fall apart right there in front of him, and I didn't want that to be the last thing he remembered of me. People often think heartbreak only comes from romance, but sometimes the deepest heartbreak comes from family, from the ones you love the most, forgetting just how much you love them. That day, I didn't know where I was going. I only knew one thing. I had to keep walking, even if it meant walking away from the very place I once called home. I wasn't always alone. For most of my life, my world revolved around my family, especially my son, David. He was my only child, the light of my life. I raised him in a small, two-bedroom house on the south side of town. Life wasn't easy, but it was full of love. I worked as a nurse for almost 30 years. Long hours, endless shifts. I missed birthdays, holidays, and even Sunday services sometimes. But every time I came home, tired and sore, I'd see that little boy waiting by the door with his blanket in hand, shouting, "Mama, you're home!" That's all it ever took. His smile could melt away the whole world's weight. When his father passed, David was only 12. I didn't know how I was going to make it. Losing my husband was like losing my balance in life. But I looked at my boy and I told myself, "You can't fall apart. He needs you strong." So I worked double shifts. I cooked, cleaned, prayed, and pushed through the pain. And somehow we made it. As the years passed, David grew into a kind young man. He got good grades, joined the debate team, and went off to college, the first in our family to do so. I remember that day like it was yesterday. He was packing his bags, nervous but excited. I kept folding and refolding his shirts, fussing over him like mothers do. He laughed and said, "Mama, I'll be fine. It's just a few hours away." But when he hugged me goodbye, I felt his heartbeat against my chest, and I knew life was about to change. For the next few years, I poured myself into work. The house was quiet, too quiet. Sometimes I'd make dinner for two out of habit. I'd set a plate down for him and then realize he wasn't coming home that night. When he'd call, I'd keep my voice bright, hiding the loneliness that sat beside me at the dinner table. "I'm proud of you, baby," I'd say. "Just take care of yourself." He'd always answer, "I will, Mama. Don't you worry." Years went by. David graduated, got a good job, and moved back to the city. I thought life was about to get easier. Maybe I'd get to see him more. Maybe the house would feel alive again, and for a while it did. Then one day, he brought someone home. Her name was Monica, his girlfriend, beautiful, polished, and confident. The kind of woman who filled a room just by walking in. I liked her right away. She spoke softly, smiled often, and treated me kindly. She'd sit with me in the kitchen while I cooked, asking about recipes and stories from my nursing days. She'd say, "Miss Gloria, you have so much patience. I wish I could be like you." I remember laughing and telling her, "It's not patience, honey. It's just years of learning not to fuss over everything." David looked happy. That was all that mattered. They got married 2 years later, a small ceremony, nothing fancy. Just family and close friends in a little church downtown. I wore my best teal dress, the one my husband always said brought out the kindness in my eyes. When David took Monica's hand and said his vows, I cried quietly. Not because I was sad, but because I realized my little boy was grown. He wasn't mine anymore, not completely. That's the bittersweet truth about being a mother. You spend your whole life teaching them to stand on their own. And when they finally do, you have to learn how to let go. A few months after their wedding, I started noticing little changes. David didn't call as often. When he did, his voice was rushed. "Sorry, Mama, I've been busy with work." I understood. Life gets busy. Marriage, career, it's a lot. Then one day he called and said, "Mama, why don't you move in with us? You shouldn't be living alone anymore." At first I hesitated. I didn't want to be a burden. But he insisted, and Monica even said, "It'd be nice to have you around." We could use the help with Caleb. Caleb was their newborn, my first grandchild. A sweet, chubby-cheeked baby with the brightest eyes I'd ever seen. From the first moment I held him, I felt something light up inside me. Like a piece of my heart that had been asleep for years finally woke up. Moving in with them was an adjustment. Their home was in a quiet suburban neighborhood, wide driveways, trimmed lawns, and smiling neighbors who waved from across the street. At first, everything felt like a dream. I'd wake up early, make breakfast, and help with the baby while Monica got ready for work. David would kiss his son goodbye every morning before heading out, and I'd spend the day singing old church songs while rocking Caleb in his cradle. We were a family again. I thought, this is how life was meant to be. Sometimes, when Monica came home late, I'd have dinner waiting. She'd smile and say, "Miss Gloria, you really don't have to cook." But I wanted to. It gave me purpose. It made me feel useful. But slowly, almost too quietly to notice, the warmth began to fade. At first, it was just small things. A sigh from Monica when I offered to help, a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, a soft tone that carried something sharper underneath. I brushed it off. Told myself she was just tired. Being a new mother isn't easy. I remembered those days myself, the sleepless nights, the endless worry. But then I started feeling like I was in the way. One evening, I was in the kitchen washing dishes. Monica walked in, looked at the counter and said, Could you please not rearrange the plates? I like them where they are. I froze for a second, the soapy water dripping from my hands. I smiled and said softly, "Of course, honey." It was such a small thing. But it stung, because I had spent my whole life running a home. I had my ways, my habits, not out of pride, but out of love. And suddenly, those ways didn't belong anywhere. David didn't seem to notice the tension. He was working long hours trying to provide. When he got home, he'd play with Caleb, kiss Monica, and fall asleep on the couch. Sometimes I'd sit quietly in the corner, just watching. I didn't want to interrupt, but a part of me missed when he used to turn to me and ask, "You okay, Mama?" Now, it felt like I was fading into the background of his life, like old wallpaper nobody saw anymore. Still, I tried to keep peace. That's what mothers do. We carry peace in our pockets, even when no one asks for it. Every Sunday, I'd go to church, pray for my family, and come home with a lighter heart. The pastor always said, "Love doesn't stop just because it's hard." And I believed him. When I got home, Caleb would run to me with his arms open, yelling, "Grandma!" And every time, I'd scoop him up and whisper, "You're my sunshine, baby." For those few moments, I felt whole again. But somewhere deep down, I knew something was shifting, like a quiet tide moving beneath calm water. You don't see it right away, but you feel it. The air changes. The tone of dinner conversations shifts. Smiles become shorter, words more measured. It's like a home starts holding its breath, and that's exactly what ours did. That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it yet. Because love, when unspoken too long, starts to wither, and the same walls that once held laughter can start to echo with silence. If you agree with me and liked my story, show it by giving this video a like. Let's see how many of us feel the same. I'm curious, what city are you listening from? And what time is it there? Write it in the comments. If you'd like to support my journey, you can send me a small donation. Thank you for listening and sharing your precious time with me. For more life stories like this one, check out the other videos on my channel and subscribe. I've added 2 new stories on the screen that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click one and start listening now. Love to you all. It's funny how trouble doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it tiptoes in, quietly, softly, like a whisper behind closed doors. That's how it began with us. At first, it was the small things, little glances, little pauses. I'd be talking, and Monica's eyes would flick toward her phone. I'd tell a story from when David was little, and she'd smile politely but never ask more. The air around us started to feel heavy, like there were words we weren't saying. One evening, David came home late. He looked tired, tie loose, shoulders sagging. I'd made meatloaf, his favorite. The smell filled the house. When he sat down, I served him a plate, smiling the way I always did. He took a few bites, then said softly, "Mama, you didn't have to cook tonight." Monica ordered takeout. I froze, my hand still holding the serving spoon. Monica looked up from her phone and said, "Oh, I didn't think you were cooking, Miss Gloria. Sorry." I smiled quickly, hiding the sting in my chest. "It's all right, honey. We can eat it tomorrow." But the silence after that was thick. David kept his head down. Monica scrolled quietly, and the sound of the clock ticking filled the space between us. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stood in the kitchen under the dim light, packing the untouched food into containers. The house was so still I could hear my own breathing, and I whispered to myself, "It's okay. You're just helping. Don't take it to heart. But the thing about small hurts is, they stack up over time. Weeks passed. Caleb was growing fast. He could walk now, or rather waddle like a little duck. Every morning he'd toddle to my room, climb into my bed, and snuggle under my blanket. He'd giggle when I made silly faces, his laughter echoing through the house like sunshine. Those mornings were my favorite part of the day. It was just us, before the world woke up, before the tension in the house had a chance to start breathing again. But then one morning, as I was pouring his cereal, Monica came downstairs, her face tight. "Miss Gloria," she said gently but firmly, "I appreciate all the help with Caleb, but I think he needs to start spending mornings with me. I don't want him to get too attached." The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered on the counter. "Too attached?" I repeated softly. She smiled faintly. "You know what I mean. You're amazing with him, but I don't want him confusing boundaries. I'm his mother, after all." I nodded slowly. "Of course, honey. You're his mama. I understand." But the word stayed with me all day. Too attached. I never thought love could be mistaken for a problem. After that, I started keeping my distance a little more. I stayed in my room longer, came out only when needed. I didn't want to step on anyone's toes. I could hear them downstairs sometimes, laughing, watching TV, eating dinner. I'd sit on my bed, knitting or reading my Bible, trying to tell myself that this was just how families change. That it wasn't personal. But it's hard not to feel invisible when you can hear laughter you're no longer part of. One Sunday, David asked, "Mama, are you coming to church with us?" Before I could answer, Monica said quickly, "Actually, I thought we'd try the new church near the park." "You wouldn't like it, Miss Gloria. It's kind of loud and modern." She smiled like it was a joke. But it wasn't. David hesitated, glanced at me, and then said softly, "Maybe next week, Mama?" I nodded and said, "Sure, baby. You go on." When the door closed behind them, I sat by the window, looking at the empty street. The world outside felt far away, like I was watching it through glass. For the first time, I felt like a guest in my own family. Later that evening, I heard them arguing quietly in their room. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard my name once or twice. Then, the next morning, David came to my room. "Mama," he said gently, sitting at the edge of my bed, "Monica feels like you might be overworking yourself. Maybe take a little break, let us handle things for a bit?" I smiled at him. "Baby, I'm fine. Helping around the house makes me happy." He nodded slowly, eyes soft with concern. "I know, Mama, but you've done enough your whole life. Maybe now's the time to rest." I looked at him, really looked. My boy, the same boy I once rocked to sleep, who used to cling to my arm in crowded stores, and now he was telling me to rest. I didn't argue. I just smiled and said, "All right, sweetheart, whatever you think is best." But when he left the room, I sat there for a long time, hands folded in my lap, feeling like I'd just been quietly told that I wasn't needed anymore. The days started blending together. I'd wake up, clean a little, read, nap, repeat. Monica stopped asking for help altogether. She took over the cooking, the laundry, even the grocery lists. Whenever I tried to pitch in, she'd smile and say, "Don't worry about it, Miss Gloria. I've got it covered." She meant well, maybe. But every time she said it, it felt like she was building a small wall between us. Polite, brick by polite brick. And on the other side of that wall, I could feel myself slowly fading. One afternoon, I decided to make a simple Sunday dinner. just like old times. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and cornbread. The smell filled the house, warm and familiar. When David and Monica came home, they looked surprised. "Oh," Monica said, stopping in the doorway. "You cooked?" "Yes," I said, smiling softly. "I thought we could eat together." David smiled awkwardly. "That's nice, Mama, but we already ate." Monica's mom dropped off dinner. The words hit like a quiet wave. I nodded, forcing my smile to stay. "Oh, that's fine, baby. There's plenty. You can have some later." After they went upstairs, I sat at the dining table by myself, looking at the plates I'd set. The food was still steaming. The candles I lit flickered gently. I tried a bite of the chicken, but it tasted like nothing. Then I heard footsteps. Caleb waddled in, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Grandma?" he said softly. I smiled through the blur in my eyes. "Hey, baby, you hungry?" He nodded, and I served him a little plate. We sat together, just the two of us. He ate clumsily, mashed potatoes on his cheeks, and I laughed quietly, wiping his face. And in that tiny moment, between spoonfuls and giggles, I felt something I'd been missing. A small reminder that love still lived in that house. But even that eventually started to change. One morning, Monica asked if I could watch Caleb while she went out. Of course, I said yes. I was always happy to. But when she came back, she looked uneasy. "Miss Gloria," she said gently, "please don't feed him sweets without asking me." I found a candy wrapper in his room. "Oh, that was just a little lollipop," I explained. "He'd been such a good boy. I thought, I know," she interrupted softly, "but I'm trying to manage his sugar. You understand, right?" I nodded. "Yes, honey, I understand." She smiled tightly and left the room. I sat there for a long while after she left, looking at the empty candy wrapper on the counter. It was such a small thing, but to me, it felt like another door quietly closing. Little by little, the silence grew heavier. There were fewer good mornings, fewer shared meals. Sometimes I'd hear them laughing together downstairs, and I'd pause at my door, thinking about joining them. But something inside me would whisper, "Don't, you'll just be in the way." So I stayed in my room. My world shrank down to those four walls, the sound of the ticking clock, the creak of the floorboards, and the quiet hum of a house that no longer felt like home. I started talking to God more, whispering prayers into the stillness, not angry ones, not desperate ones, just quiet questions. "Lord," I'd say, "did I do something wrong? Did I stay too long where I wasn't needed?" No answer ever came, but the act of asking felt like breathing again. Then came the evening that changed everything. The evening that turned quiet distance into real heartbreak. It started like any other, calm, ordinary. I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard them arguing upstairs. Their voices were low but sharp. Then David came down, his face drawn tight. "Mama," he said softly, "can we talk?" I nodded. "Of course, baby. What's wrong?" He sat down across from me, hands clasped, eyes avoiding mine. "Monica feels like the house is getting crowded," he began. "We've been talking, and maybe it's time you think about having your own space again." For a moment, I didn't understand. I blinked at him, words stuck in my throat. "My own space?" I repeated. He nodded. "Yeah, you deserve your own peace, Mama. Maybe a small apartment nearby, or—" I stopped him gently. "Are you asking me to leave, David?" He looked down. "I just think it might be better for everyone. Monica's been stressed, and—" I held up my hand. "It's okay, baby. You don't have to explain. I could feel my chest tightening, but I kept my voice steady. I'd promised myself long ago I'd never cry in front of my son again, not since his father's funeral. So instead, I smiled. A small, trembling smile, and said, "All right, if that's what you think is best." He reached out, took my hand. "Mama, it's not like that. You'll still come by. We'll visit. It's just—" I squeezed his hand gently. "I understand, baby. Don't worry." But deep inside, something broke. That night, I sat by the window, staring at the quiet streetlights outside. The same ones I used to watch from my own porch years ago, and I realized, somehow, in all the years of loving and giving, I had turned invisible in the very place I helped build. That was the night I started packing, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood. Love sometimes has to learn when to step back, even when it hurts. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words, "your own space," kept echoing in my mind. They sounded polite enough, but behind them, I could hear the truth my son couldn't say out loud. He wanted me gone. Not because he stopped loving me, no, but because love had changed shape. It had shifted into something distant, something careful. And careful love can hurt more than hatred ever could. I sat at the edge of my bed, my suitcase open beside me. I wasn't even sure where to start. My hands trembled as I folded my dresses, the same ones I wore to church, to birthdays, to Sunday dinners that weren't happening anymore. With each fold, I whispered a little goodbye to the laughter that once filled this house, to the smell of cornbread baking in the oven, to the mornings when Caleb's tiny hands would tug at my sleeve. I ran my fingers along the quilt I'd sewn years ago, the one that had followed me from home to home through every chapter of my life. When I reached for my framed picture of David, the one from his college graduation, I paused. He looked so proud in that photo, so full of promise. I remembered the way he'd hugged me afterward and whispered, "I couldn't have done this without you, Mama." Now, years later, I wondered if he even remembered saying that. The next morning, I woke early and started cleaning the kitchen. Old habits die hard. I couldn't leave without leaving things spotless. As I wiped the counter, Monica came downstairs. She looked surprised to see the suitcase by the door. "Oh," she said, her voice soft. "You're really going?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, honey. It's time." She hesitated, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't mean to make things hard, Miss Gloria. I just wanted us to have our own space. You know how families can get." I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't cruel. "Just young, overwhelmed. I know, baby," I said gently. "You did what you thought was best for your family." She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something more, but no words came out. After a moment, she just nodded and walked away, and I went back to wiping the counter, because sometimes that's all you can do to keep your hands from shaking. A few hours later, David came downstairs, car keys in hand. He looked nervous, like he didn't know what to say. "I'll drive you to the apartment complex we talked about," he said softly. I nodded. "All right, baby." "Thank you." The ride was quiet, the kind of silence that feels too heavy to break. I looked out the window, watching the houses pass, children playing, neighbors waving, leaves falling in slow spirals. It was a beautiful day, but everything inside me felt gray. David cleared his throat once, trying to start a conversation. "Mama, I really hope you'll like the place. It's quiet, close to the park, and Caleb can visit all the time." I smiled without looking at him. "That sounds nice." But what I didn't say was, I didn't want a park. I wanted my family. When we arrived, he helped me carry my suitcase inside. The apartment was small but clean. There was a single window that looked out onto a line of oak trees, and sunlight pooled gently on the floor. He set my bags down and turned to me. "You sure you'll be okay, Mama?" I looked up at him, my heart tightening with pride and pain all at once. "I'll be fine, baby. I've been fine before." He nodded, then hesitated. "Monica feels bad, you know. She didn't mean to hurt you." "I know," I said softly, "and I don't hold it against her." He looked relieved, maybe even grateful. But deep down, I could see it, the guilt in his eyes, the kind of guilt that sits quietly and never really leaves. When he hugged me goodbye, I held him a little longer than I should have. He smelled like the same cologne I used to buy him every Christmas. And when he pulled away, I whispered, "Take care of your family, David. Love them the way I loved you." He nodded, eyes shining. "I will, Mama." Then he turned and left, and just like that, the door closed behind him. I stood in the stillness of that little apartment. No laughter, no footsteps, no sound except the hum of the refrigerator. I sat on the edge of the bed and let out the breath I'd been holding for weeks. For the first time in a long while, I cried. Not loudly, not bitterly, just soft, quiet tears that rolled down my cheeks and onto my hands. Tears that carried years of memories. The scraped knees I kissed better. The nights I stayed up sewing costumes for school plays. The years of giving and hoping it would always be enough. But life has a way of teaching you that love doesn't always guarantee a seat at the table. Sometimes, love means stepping away, even from the ones you gave everything to. The days that followed were long and quiet. I spent mornings watching the sunlight shift across the floor, afternoons reading old letters, and evenings knitting by the window. Caleb's laughter used to echo in my ears, but now the silence felt like a thick blanket around me. David called a few times that first week. Short calls. "Hey, Mama, just checking in. Everything good?" And I'd always answer the same way. "Yes, baby. Everything's fine." I never told him that I missed the sound of Caleb's footsteps, or that sometimes I still set an extra plate at the table out of habit. One rainy afternoon, I decided to walk to the park nearby. The air smelled like wet grass and earth. Children were running through puddles, laughing. I sat on a bench under a big oak tree, pulling my shawl tighter around me. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself just be, no pretending, no smiling through the ache. I watched a little boy chase his dog across the path, and for a split second, I thought I saw Caleb, that same joyful wobble in his run, but it wasn't him. Still, that moment stirred something in me, something gentle, something healing. Maybe, I thought, this was what God wanted for me. Not punishment, not rejection, just space to remember who I was before everything revolved around others. A few days later, I got a knock on my door. When I opened it, there stood Caleb, tiny arms wide open, Monica standing a few steps behind him. "Grandma," he squealed, running into my legs. I knelt down, wrapping him in my arms, feeling his little heartbeat against mine. "Hey there, sunshine," I whispered. "I missed you so much." Monica smiled awkwardly. "We were in the area. Caleb kept asking to see you." I nodded, blinking back tears. "I'm glad you came." We sat for a while, Caleb playing on the floor, Monica sipping tea. There wasn't much conversation between us, but the silence this time wasn't sharp. It was soft. Before leaving, Monica said quietly, "He talks about you all the time." "I think he misses your stories," I smiled faintly. "Well, I've got plenty left to tell." And for the first time, her smile reached her eyes. Maybe she saw something in me she hadn't before. Not intrusion, not interference, just love. That night, I sat by my window, watching the lights flicker in the distance. I thought about all the mothers out there, the ones who gave everything, only to find themselves standing alone when the house grew quiet. And I realized something simple, yet freeing. Love doesn't disappear just because you're no longer needed in the same way. It changes shape. It moves into the spaces between visits, the phone calls, the quiet prayers you whisper before bed. It lives on, not in being seen, but in having given. I looked around my little apartment, the plants by the window, the half-knitted blanket on my chair, the framed picture of David and Caleb smiling together. It wasn't much, but it was enough, and for the first time in a long time, I felt peace, because even though my heart still ached for the home I'd left behind, I knew now that love didn't leave with me. It stayed in them, in that house, in every lesson and every hug I'd ever given, and that was enough. It's funny how time moves differently when you're alone. The days feel longer, but the nights, they feel heavier. The quiet in my apartment had become a kind of company, not warm, not cold, just constant. And in that quiet, I started to notice things I hadn't before. The way sunlight filtered through the blinds every morning, painting soft golden lines on the floor. The way the kettle's whistle filled the silence like a familiar voice. The way my own thoughts had softened, becoming less about why it happened and more about what it taught me. That's the thing about heartbreak. It can destroy you, or it can remake you. And somewhere between those long mornings and still evenings, I began to feel like I was being remade. One morning, as I was tending to my little windowsill plants, my phone rang. It was David. He hadn't called in almost a week, longer than usual. "Hey, Mama," he said, his voice sounding softer than I remembered. "Hey, baby," I replied. "Everything okay?" He paused. "Can we come by?" "Monica and Caleb want to see you." I smiled, though my heart fluttered with mixed feelings. "Of course, honey. I'll make some tea." After we hung up, I found myself moving through the apartment with purpose. I set the table, polished the teacups, and baked a little batch of cornbread, just like I used to. It felt good to prepare for someone again, to fill the air with warmth instead of silence. When they arrived that afternoon, the sound of Caleb's laughter filled the hallway before I even opened the door. He ran in, jumping into my arms like no time had passed at all. "Grandma, I brought you something." He handed me a crayon drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "That's you, me, and Daddy," he said proudly. I looked at the picture, my throat tightening. "It's beautiful, baby." "Thank you." Behind him, Monica stood holding a pie dish. "I made this for you," she said quietly. "Apple. I remember you said you liked it." I smiled warmly. "That's very kind of you, sweetheart." Come in, come in." We sat together around the small table. At first the air was stiff, polite, careful. But Caleb's energy soon loosened it, his little giggles weaving threads of light through the tension. I poured tea, the way I always used to, and for a moment, it almost felt like home again. Then David cleared his throat. "Mama," he said, his eyes fixed on his cup, "I owe you an apology. I looked at him quietly, waiting. I thought I was doing the right thing, he continued, trying to keep peace between everyone. But I see now that I was just avoiding the truth. I should have protected you. I should have spoken up. Monica reached for his hand, her voice trembling slightly. He's right. I didn't realize how my words hurt you. I was so focused on building my own home that I forgot. You're part of that home, too. The room fell silent. Their honesty hung in the air. Fragile, trembling, but real. I took a slow breath, letting the words sink in. Thank you, I said softly. That means more than you know. They both looked up at me, surprised, maybe even relieved. I wasn't angry, I continued, just hurt. Because when you've given someone your whole life, it's hard to understand when they suddenly want space from you. But I also know that growing families need to find their own rhythm. I just wish we'd found a gentler way to do it. David's eyes glistened. You didn't deserve any of it, Mama. I'm so sorry. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. Baby, you don't need to carry that guilt. Life has a way of teaching us what we need to know. What matters is that we don't forget the lesson. After that, the conversation lightened. We talked about Caleb's school, Monica's new job, and the flowers I'd planted on my balcony. Caleb wanted to see them, so I took him outside, his tiny hand wrapped in mine. He pointed at a small sprout pushing through the soil. What's that one, Grandma? That's a marigold, I said, smiling. It's small now, but it'll grow strong and bright if you take care of it. He grinned. Like me? I laughed softly. Exactly like you. And in that moment, watching his little face beam with pride, I realized something. The love between generations doesn't fade. It just changes shape, finding new ways to bloom. After they left that day, I sat by the window again. The late afternoon light stretched across the room, warm and golden. For the first time, I didn't feel alone, not because they had come to visit, but because something inside me had finally settled. Forgiveness isn't always about saying it's okay. Sometimes, it's about letting go of the picture you held in your heart, the one where everyone stays the same. And nothing ever changes, because people do change. They stumble, they grow, they learn, sometimes too late, sometimes just in time. And maybe that's what love really is, giving others the space to become who they're meant to be, even if it hurts a little along the way. Over the next few weeks, David and Monica visited more often. Sometimes they brought Caleb. Sometimes it was just the two of them. We cooked together, talked, and even laughed. Small, tentative laughs that slowly grew into the real kind. Monica started helping me in the kitchen again, just like when she first joined the family. We'd roll out dough and talk quietly about things that had once felt too heavy. One afternoon, as we cleaned up, she turned to me and said, I think I understand now what it means to be part of a family. It's not just living under the same roof. It's learning how to love through the messy parts, I smiled. You're learning fast, baby. It took me years to realize that. She laughed, a genuine warm sound that filled the room like sunlight, and in that moment, I knew we were healing. Not perfectly. Not instantly, but piece by piece. Then one Sunday, David called me early in the morning. Mama, we're having dinner tonight. At our house. I'd love for you to come. I hesitated for a second, not out of fear, but memory. The last time I'd been in that house, it was with a suitcase by the door, but something inside me said, go. When I arrived that evening, the smell of baked chicken and collard greens filled the air. Monica met me at the door with a smile that reached her eyes this time. Caleb ran up, tugging at my hand. "Come on, Grandma. We saved your seat." They had set the table beautifully, candles lit, plates neatly arranged, soft music playing in the background. And there it was. My chair, the one at the end of the table, the one that had been missing me. David pulled it out for me and said quietly, "Welcome home, Mama." I sat down, my heart full, not just because they had made space for me again, but because we had all grown enough to fill that space with love instead of pride. As we ate, laughter filled the room once more, gentle, easy, like it had been waiting to return all along. That night, after dinner, I stepped outside to the porch. The air was cool, and the stars were just beginning to peek through the twilight. David joined me, hands in his pockets. "I didn't realize how much we needed you," he said softly. I smiled, looking up at the stars. "You didn't need me, baby. You just needed time." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe both," I chuckled softly. "Maybe both." He leaned over and kissed my forehead, the way he used to when he was little. And in that quiet moment, everything felt right again. Not perfect. Just right. When I got home later that night, I looked around my little apartment and smiled. It no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful, because now I knew I wasn't forgotten. I was still part of their world, not as someone they needed to depend on, but as someone they loved, respected, and finally understood. And that was enough for me. Life has a way of circling back, not always to the same place, but to the same lesson. When I look back now, I see a younger version of myself, trying so hard to hold everyone together, to keep peace, to make a home that felt safe. And then I see the moment it all fell apart, when my own child asked me to leave the house I'd once built with my hands and my heart. That kind of pain doesn't disappear overnight. But pain, I've learned, is also a teacher. It teaches you to listen, not just to others, but to yourself. It teaches you to let go, not because you stop caring, but because you start understanding. And most of all, it teaches you that love isn't about control. It's about trust. After that dinner, things didn't magically become perfect. There were still days when silence sat between us, when words came out awkward, when old wounds ached in quiet ways. But there was also laughter again, real laughter, the kind that fills the house and makes you forget, just for a moment, how fragile love can be. I started visiting on Sundays, not because they needed me there, but because they wanted me there. Monica would save me a chair near the window, and Caleb would climb into my lap after dinner, showing me his latest drawings. And David, my boy, he looked at me differently now. With gratitude, with softness, with the kind of understanding that only comes when you've made mistakes and had the courage to face them. Sometimes he'd hug me goodbye and whisper, "I love you, Mama." And every time I'd whisper it right back. Because love, real love, always deserves to be spoken out loud. One evening, as I was leaving their house, Monica walked me to the car. She hesitated, then said quietly, "You know, I used to think strength meant doing everything on my own. But now I see strength is letting people love you, even when it's uncomfortable." I smiled at her, touched her arm gently and said, "You've learned something it took me a lifetime to understand." She smiled back, eyes soft and full. And in that exchange, in that tiny human moment, I knew the distance between us had finally closed. Back home that night, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The same window I'd stared out of the night I left their house, when everything felt like it was ending. But this time, the air was peaceful. The kind of quiet that feels full, not empty. I looked up at the stars and whispered a small thank you, not to anyone in particular, just to life itself, because even after all the hurt, the tears, the loneliness, I had found my way back to love. Not the same love as before, something deeper, wiser, softer. A love that had been tested, stretched, and forgiven. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Family isn't about who's right or wrong. It's about showing up again and again, even when it's hard. It's about choosing grace over pride, patience over anger, and understanding over silence. You don't always get the ending you want, but if you keep your heart open, sometimes you get the one you need. And as I sit here, watching the night fade into dawn, I realize I'm no longer waiting for things to go back to how they were. Because I've learned, some chapters aren't meant to be rewritten. They're meant to be remembered, appreciated, and then gently closed. Tomorrow, I'll visit again. I'll bring cornbread. And when Caleb runs to the door, shouting, "Grandma's here!" I'll smile and know that love, the kind that endures, always finds its way home.